podcast excellence since 2005. This is the King of Podcasts radio network, kingofpodcasts.com.
You know, I can live without presidential debates every election cycle. Maybe we just have podcasts instead.
The King of Podcasts radio network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast. Here is the King of Podcasts.
Welcome to the program. We just wrapped up a couple days ago the 2024 presidential election, which it already takes too long to go through the process of seeing the campaigning, policy, propositions, prescriptions, all that, just to get to the point where we can finally get to the race and we finally get to vote, and all the ways that have to be done with it, and to spend hours upon hours waiting to find a winner. That's if things were going to have to delay the outcome of the election, but we actually found out about it the same night, which is nice. That's what everybody wants to have. Get it done, and we move along. And now we will wait, roughly 120 days for the next president of the United States, which is now Donald Trump. Once again, he'll go and assume the office, and that's it. We'll see where everything goes, how it goes. But one of the things we can say is that what we're getting from the media establishment on a regular basis. Now, remember, I'm going to disclaim myself, right? I am telling you that as I bring this up, I am not here to go ahead and spread any bias, okay? I am registered no party affiliation. I do not submit to one party or the other. But I am very much entrenched into watching and consuming politics because it is one of those places where the media is so focused, so centralized on, and it's about how we get our media. Now, we know that there are various ideas of what people want to say about particular candidates. And we know that where people will go for their news and their information based on their political slant. But the thing is that the internet and the media establishment, whether it's through network TV, radio, or cable, they're still serving the betters of the American voters. And for people just on TV, just to know what's going on. Politics isn't really much a soap opera to me. That's how I always felt and always perceived it, in the last few years especially. But what I do know is that it goes back to the 1992 election. When Bill Clinton came in to office, he was the one that really changed what I think was into the modern day version of what presidential campaigns are. When he goes out, plays saxophone on Arsenio Hall, that was a watershed moment. Everything changed from there. Now, it didn't stay like that forever, but the thing was that Clinton ran twice. Then you go into G.W. Bush, which there's another thing with that. But the thing is that once we get into Obama in 2008, another watershed moment because of the campaign that was done. I mean, Clinton had one campaign that was really comes out of nowhere for some people, but is really likable, goes across, passes what the Republican establishment is, and trudges through and gets 2 terms. Now, for Obama, rock star campaign. We'll never take that away. That 2008 campaign was amazing. And, you know, the person that was put up in the Republican Party was not going to beat him. Not in the momentum that Barack Obama had all the way up to winning that election. And then also the momentum to go ahead and win a second term. And basically, people that have been associated with President Barack Obama, they are all associated right now with who was in office in the Biden-Harris administration. We all know there's an attachment. There's a whole, almost like a family tree that goes into all this as to where everything goes, right? The normal course of events, except for 2016, because Biden did not make it through to become a candidate, but that's okay. He didn't get over to be the candidate, the nominee, right? Because of where everything happened. But what happened is that it's the way we see our news now. We obviously know there's been a change in how the news is portrayed. And this has nothing to do with politics so much as it does just the news itself. Because we know when the internet came into play, we know that national and cable news, it was becoming passé because we had the internet to watch all of our information. I mean, same thing with the newspapers. And we know the digital disruption that I always talk about, it made a lot of changes. And traditional media was never ready for it. The media establishment was never ready for it. Thus, this is why this program talks about it. Because tonight is a case study on what podcasting has done in terms of programming that has really reached a great sect of viewers and listeners more than ever. If you thought podcasting became relevant, what was relevant, coming in a couple of years ago, and even when I would say it was back in 2012, 2013, and people would go ahead and shit on me that, like the pre-serial days, podcasting was just like this grassroots term. It was kind of like, doing it from your basement kind of thing. I get it. But look where it is today. Podcasting completely influenced this election cycle more than any other. Really what it matters is that it was on how people viewed it and what the candidates did on those podcast platforms. Because you know what? There's one thing about the media establishment. They want to be able to control what content they put out because they have people to answer to. Okay, these big corporate companies, they have people to answer to. They have shareholders. They have sponsors. A lot of people are in their ear as to what they're allowed to go and report on. And one of the things that's done as well is that news can't just be news. It must be entertainment. It must be something that will engage the audience. Maybe not entertainment, but it could also be something that will be making you feel all the emotions. Feel sad, feel angry, feel happy, feel upset, feel like you want to do something. I mean, that's really what encompasses what the media does now. In the 90s, they were seeing that they were getting shown up by the likes of Hard Copy, A Current Affair, and Inside Edition. Meanwhile, Inside Edition still lives today. We had the National Enquirer back then. And the National Enquirer was great, but basically TMZ is taking over for that. They are the current day National Enquirer. And the one thing is that when you have those tabloid sources, okay, the National Enquirer and TMZ, and the way they would salaciously put out stories, and they might not be totally correct, well, they would have to retract, or they would get sued. And National Enquirer absolutely got lawsuits up and down, left and right. That's just the way it was. But then things changed. Because the news started applying their own. Because you know what? When things started happening, the Monica Lewinsky scandal, you go into, just various things. The media decided to go ahead and start getting more tabloidistic. It's pretty obvious now. If you watch the nightly news, now they might still present it. The tone might still be very much reserved, relaxed, very informative. They're giving you Walter Cronkite, Peter Jennings, Dan Rather vibes. Sure, you could think that. But the truth is, the stories, the reporters, what they're talking about, they're creating it with a salacious tone. They're doing it tabloidistic. And opinion is included in their commentary of the news. It's just not just news. It's opinion editorial. Now, I already said, we don't get that now where people will separate that. There's a lot of times where certain outlets, they're expected to go ahead and have their opinion embedded in the news story. That's what's expected now. I don't care if one side or the other is better. Like, we got a lot of these channels. And the funny part is that, we have more channels like that. We know the mainstays right now, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. And we've had more that have come in over the last few years in News Nation, in Newsmax, which has been around, but now, we talked to Chris Ruddy of Newsmax a while back. They've been around, but they're much more now brought up to the times because competition was able to bring themselves forward. And there's always been other underling news sources out there as well, not as well known, but there's some that obviously they get some play, and they obviously had some influence and they were able to get some coverage during the election. But nothing like podcasting. Because what also happened is because of some of the people that were on television maybe 5, 10, 20 years ago, you see a lot of them have moved over into podcasting or into new media. You could say Keith Olbermann, Bill O'Reilly, Megyn Kelly, Piers Morgan. A lot of those folks have moved over. They found a way to go ahead and see, well, podcasting can make you money, and you can do, have multiple platforms to put your podcast on, and it can be television. You can present it as television, and you can produce it great now. Like, the technology's gotten so far ahead, that's why we have so many shows on now. And very well produced, many of them. I don't go through the trouble of video production just because it's too much for me. And a talking head like me doing this, no, I don't need to do that. But there's a lot there. Plenty. So what we got to go and do is we need to go ahead and run through what the podcasting platforms that are out there, and really what the podcasts that really stood out, that really gave us all the information we really wanted to know, because we know now that what the legacy media, the media establishment was doing right now on all these network and cable channels, it's noise. With a little bit of signal. You don't really get to know, like if you had to go and watch a newscast, can you really just pinpoint what are 4 or 5 different things that you learned from the show? When I can tell you that on a podcast, you could get just as much in a 3-hour podcast because you're sitting there. It's almost like an audiobook. You are listening to the commentary. You're listening to, interviewer, interviewee, casual conversations. You have time to get into conversations, really into something in depth. Dare I say, quite a few podcasts are out there are intellectual. They're pretty smart. And they also just know how to talk about things that will just relate to the rest of the audience, because they're not trying to, there might be advertisers, but remember, they're supporting on the fact that they have affiliate links, or they have, some other campaigns from a promo code. So it's not based on them trying to direct people to the advertiser so much, that they have to go and do something to get to the advertiser and cut the time out. So there's a focus on advertising. Advertising complements the podcast. And it all depends on the credibility, the spotlight, and the draw and the reach that the host has with the content. Because it's not the content that draws the audience. It's also it's really more the host that creates the content. Because I know for me, I would figure maybe people will come to my shows because they know it's me talking about it. And they might know where my aspect is, where my commentary comes from, and what I will talk about. So that's why you come to this program regularly. Or if you're just listening to this program for the first time, thanks for listening in and finding the show. We've been here since January 2018 and done a lot of shows here. It's wonderful. I've been enjoying it so much. I think it's episode 357 right now. I forget where I'm at right now, but I think we get to 360 coming up. So let's go and delve into podcasting itself. And the podcasts that were given access, exclusive access to these presidential candidates. It's one thing to go and have a 10, 15-minute hit on a Sunday show, whether it's Meet the Press, Face the Nation, or This Week on ABC, or Firing Line, or, well, not Firing Line, Washington, what's the one that Margaret Hoover hosts? Washington Journal, right? You have all the cable shows that could take on the presidential candidates at any time, vice presidential candidates, surrogates, all this, but the candidates themselves, okay, the stars in this election. If you want to hear from them, you want to really get to know the people, the podcasts give you a chance to really get to know people across the board. Tim Walz did them. J.D. Vance did them. And we got to learn quite a bit about people. But the one thing is that it's also the approach that the campaigns decided to go and do to use these platforms. Because one of the things I think was a detriment to why the Kamala Harris campaign was not able to get past the finish line. Granted, valiant effort. There's no embarrassment to what happened in that election in terms of the fact that, okay, for what the campaign did, I mean, they got about as many votes as Hillary Clinton did. Still would be say at a landslide, but still it comes down to what, 7 or 8 states in particular, battleground states. That was the reason that if you win those, you win the whole thing. But also there was a popular vote. For whatever reason, there was aggression of voters. For whatever reason, we have less than 10 million voters that voted for the Democratic candidate, Joe Biden, in 2020. Partly because you would think that because of COVID, you would have an increase of voters. For whatever reason, the current note right now is if Kamala Harris is right now in the vote tally for her in the popular vote is under 70 million votes, while President Biden got 81 million votes, something's there. What is it that did not bring that voter base to the election? What was missing in the message? I think the podcasts that were done and what both individual candidates appeared on and what they talked about says a major story. But before we get into the podcasts that these presidential candidates appeared on, let's talk about what else was on social media and what was on the internet that really gave us a chance to go and learn more, or just to get fed into the echo chamber of whichever side of the political persuasion you were. Okay. So say if you had more of a leftist liberal viewpoint, one of the things that was really amazing to me, and listen, I listened to a lot of stuff online. Like for this election cycle, for whatever reason, and I actually took time off. I actually took years off, not even really paying attention, but I got back into it again. And one of the things I noticed a lot was, for those, I guess, at the very top, besides the cable news, network news, you got Bill Maher, which his show goes into podcast, and, it's quite a good show. I was watching some of the folks that were brought in, some younger Democratic commentators, or debaters, let's just say. The debating thing was really popular this time around. Now, I used to remember that was Politicon. I think it was a major event that would happen every year, and there would always be a number of different right-wing or left-wing people that would get together, and they would have debates on stage. That was very popular for a long time. But now it's gone online. And one of the things I noticed was that, so there were, 3 or 4 guys, young 20-year-old white guys that were on TikTok. And every night I would catch one or all 4 of these guys doing shows on here. There's Harry Sisson, Chris Mowry, Dean Withers, and Parker. I don't know what his last name was. But these 4 guys were on constantly. They'd have the backdrop, I'm voting for Kamala Harris. Why are you voting for Trump? So they wanted to go ahead and bring out Trump supporters to talk to them. One of the things for them was that, if you are a radio aficionado like I am, okay, Tom Likas always said this as well, that the radio audience that calls you on the phone represents the 1% of the audience. And let's also say that many times the phone calls to the radio show are usually not the best. You're not going to get most intellectual people or the most well-informed people listening in and calling into the show, which is why Phil Hendry made it an institution, made it a career off of using phone callers to deceive them that they were listening to a show that was very salacious and controversial as he was playing the host and the guest. Again, go look for the Phil Hendry story, and I forget the name of the documentary that he did last year. Go look for it. It's really, Phil Hendry is an institution, a radio god. I mean, he's just wonderful. Again, heralded up to the level of Howard Stern or Tom Likas or Rush Limbaugh, or, there was a lot of others like that. And when I look at what was being offered to me, I would listen to those guys, and sometimes I would listen in just to go and see what kind of debates they would get into with somebody. And they would also have other people that would come on among their side that would help out in terms of a legal sense to give some extra information, maybe fact checking, things like that. It was entertaining. When I stop on TikTok, I catch these live streams all the time. I'm like, yeah, okay, this is fine. I'll watch it. And I would sit there. Sometimes I'd live there for about 30 minutes just to see what they're saying. Right? And these same folks will also go on other shows. They'll also go and do other debates. Jubilee is a channel now that I subscribe to. And I see all the debates they do over there. 30 Democrats with one versus one Republican or whatever it is. Or one particular debater goes against all the 30 people. It's like the balloon, 20 people with a balloon and one guy, right? The 20 women with a balloon and one guy. Those kind of things. These gimmick podcasts or videos that are, they're interesting. You usually catch them in clips, but sometimes I'll catch the whole thing, or at least listen and peruse through some of them. That was one thing I saw over there on that side. And of course, you got other commentators that are very much known, and they have their own streams and all. Destiny, I know about. And then, on the right side, there also is another gamut. But the thing is, I'm not going to go into too much on the Twitch streamers and the other streamers on these other alternate channels. We're going to stick it to those that might be familiar, mostly on YouTube, right? Young Turks, also going to be over there. David Pakman, right? You have those commentators. It's an echo chamber feeding you into what you want to hear on that particular political persuasion, okay? On the other side, you have Alex Jones. You have Steven Crowder, you got the Daily Wire, and then you have others that I would like to say would be more towards the middle, but they're also because they come from cable news. Piers Morgan, Bill O'Reilly, Megyn Kelly, those are the three I noticed quite a bit. And, I would catch their clips. And, of course, there were other people who would just do commentary that have been around forever. Okay, really 2016 was really the advent where I started seeing a lot of YouTube. It was just a lot of political content. And there's just some people that have been doing it ever since. You just catch on to it and, it's like familiar. You're subscribed to it. You don't remember that you're subscribed to it, but then it drops in your feed and it's something else I'll watch besides the other stuff I watch. And then there was also the pollsters I would also catch. Like, I'd catch Mark Halpern on Two-Way, or I would catch, the People's Pundit, or I would catch Rasmussen Reports, or I would catch, New York Times. Like, it was just, there was so much information to watch if you wanted to catch it. And so much content being produced. The one thing was that made it really difficult if you're going to try to consume politics is because in the presidential election cycle, so much is going on. There's so much news, so many different things of gossip or tabloid headlines that get brought out. Because remember, every word at every rally of either of these candidates or whatever interviews they're doing, they're going to get clipped up. They could be taken out of context, or they could be cutting short what was meant to be said by both candidates, to be honest. The approaches on both were very different as well. So, if you look at what we had of both candidates and where they went on, looking at the list of the significant programs they were on. If you look at Kamala Harris, we'll start with her first. She was on Call Her Daddy with Alex Wagner. So that's discussing abortion, women's rights, cost of living policies. She was on the All the Smoke podcast, and I forget which basketball players are on that, addressing mental health issues in the U.S. and educational reforms. She was on Shannon Sharp's Club Shay Shay podcast, Roland Martin's Unfiltered, and The Breakfast Club, which they're on radio, morning show radio, but still, they really have a significant podcast audience. Charlamagne the God, DJ MV, and I forget who's there now because it's not. I forget who's there now. I've gone on. I used to listen to Hot 97 every once in a while and catch what they're doing, but I was like, I've kind of lost the track. Oh no, they're Power 105. That's right, the other side. Of course, I should remember that. For Donald Trump, the most memorable would be the Joe Rogan podcast, the Joe Rogan Experience. He was also on Logan Paul's ImPaulsive this past weekend with Theo Vaughn, the Lex Friedman podcast, Flagrant with Andrew Schultz, Bustle with the Boys and Elk Boys, and Patrick Badevi's PBD Podcast, Valuetainment. Now, in these approaches, you have one candidate that was a presidential candidate, and in essence has been campaigning since 2015, right? And Donald Trump. So it's really, if I even talk about this too much, I know it causes people to respond a certain way. I get it. And, I've had to talk to people about what's going on after this election just to kind of go through and, absorb what happened, take in what had taken place, right? But the thing is that when you hear Trump on these podcasts, let's take away whichever side of the aisle that you're on and how people interpreted what he said. The same thing with Kamala Harris. Let's take away whatever interpretations you have of what they said. Let's just strip that out. Oh, this is a lie. This person's this person's this. No name calling, none of that. Let's strip this down to the bare bones. When I heard Trump on these podcasts, I feel like he went through a lot of different subjects. And the podcast would be, you would have, depending on what they're doing, I think that the hosts on those shows are, in some cases, aloof, very just laid back, casual, and they brought things out of Trump that I had never heard from before. Interesting. As for the podcast that Kamala Harris went on, these are all, and I've forgotten Roland Martin Unfiltered. That was the other one I also caught. And there's others I'm sure I could go ahead and mention, but those are the ones I remember watching her on. And I'm sure there was others, but I can't remember what they are. But those are the main ones. Call Her Daddy, All the Smoke, Club Shay Shay, Roland Martin Unfiltered, Breakfast Club, all capable podcasts. Okay, no problem there. They got an audience. They do what they do. Obviously, Call Her Daddy, one of the top shows right now. Okay. But one of the things I'm looking at with this is this. When I went to hear Kamala Harris Call Her Daddy, again, abortion, women's rights, cost of living policies, because that was the thing that it was targeted towards women. But the one thing that Kamala Harris gave me throughout the campaign. Now, we've seen her campaign twice. We know that she campaigned in 2019 and into 2020. And this is without, being the incumbent vice president. This is her coming out as working as a senator and, of course, prosecutor and attorney general, California. We know the resume. Okay. But the thing is that it's either the campaign or she was only comfortable with talking about prepared topics. And when I mean prepared, even prepared to the word, like down to the sentence. She only wanted to give the answers that she had and did not deviate too much from it. Maybe change some of the words, but the same message was out there. It was consistent, I'll say that, but it was also, there wasn't much meat to the bone. And when there was anything to the policies that were given, I wanted to know more because of the things that she was going to propose, tax credits, grants, loans. There's only so many people that get affected by that. So my question was, what about the other stuff? Like the thing is, if you have somebody that has particular policies, what's the other side going to be? With immigration, okay, there was a border bill, but we know it didn't pass. And there's a lot of things you could talk about as to what took it so long to get to the floor. Why did it not pass as a comprehensive bill with other things that might have been in it? And why did it not pass as a bill standalone? But it didn't. The thing was, we're just going to go ahead, take the same bill and push it in and sign it. That was the whole thought of that. Without any negotiations, so the Senate and the House, if you're going to have a change that's going on in Congress, maybe some more changes to it, right? But one of the things that I also felt like that those hosts were only allowed to talk about certain topics. They were restricted on what they could say. I don't think there was anything that Trump thought was out of bounds that he could talk about on all these podcasts. Like if you look at what he went and talked about, okay, he talked to AI and politics, Logan Paul. Theo Vaughn talked personal views on addiction and family values. Lex Friedman talked about medical marijuana and the 2020 election, even talked about death. I thought it was, wow. Flagrant talked about abortion rights and political reform. Bustin' with the Boys addressed immigration and trade, which is like the bread and butter topics for him. And on Patrick Bet-David, political opponents discussed national threats. They also talk about finance there. So like I said, there's a lot of things that could talk about, like there's a wide range of things that you could, maybe you'll find something there. You can find a clip of it and maybe you'll get something that you didn't know that this candidate might have said. Regardless if you think it's wrong, right, or you think it's stupid, it's lying, whatever. We're not getting into that. Again, the bare bones of the content itself and what the podcasters got out of the content. Now, as I said about Kamala Harris, the Madam Vice President got on all these programs and I wanted to learn more about her. Unfortunately, I'm surprised by this, but I did not see a lot of where, if we know that we had the vice president, for 4 years in Kamala Harris. We're familiar somewhat of her professional background, but nobody ever did anything about getting to learn about her personal background, except for limited stories that she would tell about her mom and helping take care of her, caretaking, the lady that would take care of her and her sister Maya that had her own small business. And what else? I mean, maybe some stories about when she was a prosecutor, like his professional work. But what about her own personal? We didn't hear much about her time in Howard or what she did, just about herself. I mean, Shannon Sharp, I think, did try to get into some of that. Just like, what do you like to do in the kitchen? What do you like to do this and that? There's, to kind of just bring Kamala Harris down to earth and okay, how much of an everyday person is she? What is it she does with Doug? There was a little bit of that, I guess. What Doug's talking about, it was in the Club Shay Shay podcast that, she talks about where she drinks. She really doesn't, drink much, but what she did when she was offered a cognac, she said, no, I'm not going to do that because it'll make me sleepy. But then she mentioned, like, really, when I had the last drink was, what, a beer at a baseball game. I think it was with Doug. I think that's what she said. But it's limited on what we know about her. And that was the part that was, I was hoping the podcasters were able to get something out of. There was a chance that on one of the podcasts that I produce, it's all Planting Seeds with Senator Shreve Street. I'm pretty sure I've talked about it on this program. Well, there was a chance that the state senator there, Shreve Street, and his team, if possible, we might try to work out a possible interview appearance by Kamala Harris on the program. We were going to do it. They said if they can get her, they were trying to. Okay, great. But the thing is that the producer and me preparing the hosts for the podcast every week, because I would have the host, Joe Hodes, prepared before the program. I would give him a sheet, information, bios on the guests, and some outlined talking points, articles, just to kind of get himself up to speed. But one of the things I would have done, if any of these podcasters, or any of these hosts for that matter, if I would have had a chance to do the interview, this is something I would say about this as well. If you have other podcasts that you listen to, and the same guest has been on, all right, I don't want to hear about the same thing that guest said on another podcast, because it grinds my gears when I hear that, because I'm like, it's very relaxed. I want you to do your work. I mean, when I do a podcast of my own, if I'm going to do an interview, if you ever listen to the interviews I've done on this program, or if you ever listen to Cannabis Radio on my Blunt Business program, well, I host that show. I don't make a big point of announcing I'm the host there. I just host it. Okay. But one of the things I do is I am very prepared. I will know my information. I will know what to talk about with this guest. And when they're going to come back and we talk about what they said in the answer, I'm going to be able to go ahead and retort and make some extra context out of what we're talking about. If I got to clarify something just to make sure that the audience knows what we're talking about, whatever kind of things, I'll go ahead and take that and make sure to get to it. And I don't necessarily ask questions just to ask questions. I'll ask them more as statements and just get their take on it. But I give equal time. I'll do as much as I can to make sure I get a good answer out of somebody. But I will also cut in a little bit if I feel like I'm getting something where the answer is like where I want it, or there's a point that he or she brings up something in the conversation and I got to jump in. Because I want to steer the direction of the conversation somewhere else. I'm not going to wait for the person. I will wait to take a breath. Now, in some of the interviews that Kamala Harris had, there were points where you could have cut in on her to kind of steer off to a different direction of where you want the conversation. Because, in her interviews, she did keep it to a limited amount of time. She did the audio town hall in Detroit. If it was Roland Martin, it was like 40 minutes. Club Shay Shay was an hour. All the Smoke was an hour. Call Her Daddy was an hour and like 20 minutes, I think. And Breakfast Club was like an hour. Right. It was always kind of stuck to that format. And for the most part, certain issues were always covered. And listen, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, even she said herself that when she talks about certain topics, it's repetition. It's making sure that to the base of voters she's trying to reach out to, she wanted to make sure that everybody knew exactly what was the messages that she had out there so that everybody could basically tell other people word of mouth. That was the idea. Well, then you have to go to the rallies. If I wanted to, I could probably tell you what her policy prescription is going to be. And you know what? In a couple of years, I'll probably know what it is too, because you heard it. It's over and over and over. It hit you over the head. But what I noticed more than anything was no one did this particular technique. And I want to share this with you as a king of podcasts, right? I produce podcasts for a living. And I'm telling you one thing I would have done and nobody else did was, there were crutch phrases that she had. I come from a middle income family, from a middle class family. I'm burdened by what we have been. If you go into ambitions, aspirations, and dreams, these are particular crutches that she would use. If she had to go and kind of like tailor herself into an answer, into a conversation, she might not necessarily want to answer the question being asked. Not everybody does that. We know a lot of interviews that will go like that. They don't necessarily answer the question. So you try to go and come back and try to circle back in. But before she even brings up those crutch phrases, which obviously people were making a point and saying she was doing it all the time on these interviews, take those from her. My questions would include, I would quote her in some of these particular phrases that she would like to use, these witticisms, right? These proverbs, basically, that she had. Wherever she got them from, that she always constantly gave as like words of wisdom or inspiration. Okay. I would take those words, of course, put it in complete context. I would quote those to her. Take that away from her, right? Poignant question, whatever it might be. And if you know it's going to be kind of a bit of a contentious topic, find a way to structure the question so that you'll get her to answer. So take the crutch words away. Make it comfortable to go ahead and answer the question in a way that'll be much more poignant, and you know you're going to get a direct answer from. So when I said other podcasters that take the same guest and do something else with them, all right. Tommy Chong was a guest on Blunt Business a couple of years ago. He's been on everywhere. You know, pick a radio station he's been on, pick a podcast he's been on. He's so available. And I got to produce his show for a bit. That was cool. But the one thing I'll tell you about this was this. If I was going to have this interview, he was offered a couple times to us on Cannabis Radio. I passed him off to another show because I wasn't necessarily, listen, I like him. He's great. But it's like, I wasn't the one that felt like I needed to be the one to have that person as a guest. That wasn't for me to have. But he was offered to us like, well, he's promoting a product. Okay, we'll talk to him. I mean, I'm not going to say no to him. So I did the interview. And when I did the interview, I did it different than anybody else would have done. Because, everyone wants to go and talk about Cheech and Chong and, the movies, Up in Smoke, wasn't that great? And Corsican Brothers, everything he's done. And that 70s show. I'm not going to ask him the same stuff about the same stuff. Especially when you have a celebrity. They already talked about what they've done in their career forever. Unless you have something special or different to ask them, don't. Because they've heard it somewhere else. Try to find something else to talk about with these guests. Like, that's what I want. That's what I was asking for. So, for instance, when I talked to Tommy Chong, it was April 2021 I got to talk to him, right? And this is what happened. When I did the interview with him, I got the script still in front of me. I kept it. And when I introduced him, I didn't try to go through the whole gamut of like trying to like make this big, bold kind of thing. I just did this. I said, quote, "My next guest is someone I cannot possibly stress how important his contribution has been to elevate the cannabis industry as a whole. When Cannabis Radio launched in 2015 of August, I always associated the space with one entertainment legend. That said, I'm honored and humbled to speak with that very legend. Would you welcome my guest, actor, musician, comedian, activist, and cultural icon, Tommy Chong." Boom. And we're off. That's what I used as my intro. When I asked about what he was on for, well, it was a product called Rosin Bomb, a press, to create rosin, a process, right? A press maker. We talked about that. So that was part of like, I needed to go and promote the product. So I kind of sandwiched it at the front and the back, right? And he put his name on a particular product, the Tommy Chong Rosin Bomb Rocket. We talked about that in there. And after the break, I got into some other topics. So in the cannabis industry, he's an advocate. I never hear him answer questions a lot about the cannabis industry himself as an advocate. I mean, obviously, we should be legal and this and that. But I wanted to get into real stuff, right? So in the questions I asked him, we talked about, it was adult use legalization that was being passed in New York. It had just passed, not implemented yet. Of course, it took a couple of years. And we talked about people that could, how much could be held for how much can people possess of cannabis, which again, at that time was 3 ounces, where you could smoke it, where it could not be smoked. And I asked him, do we ever think we'll get to the day that New York will finally turn green, and have adult use? Well, if it would turn green, and if New York is right, if New York will go ahead and get the full legalization and everybody gets used to it and it does very well, and if it was the key that picks the lock on federal legalization. If that means that Congress and Senate and House and, bill gets put to vote and we'll see it being passed. I asked about that. And then I asked him about the lobbying effort. I mean, the thing was, I asked him about all these things when it comes to the influence of cannabis to get it legalized, right? So I talked about various interviews I had, lobbying groups that came into play. And I talked about the fact of who they're associated with and who they're lobbying for. And the thing was, I brought a whole lot loaded into the question, and then I asked him, like, how do you feel if cannabis got legalized with the help of tobacco and alcohol getting over the finish line? Because tobacco and alcohol have been helping the lobbying efforts to get cannabis passed legally nationwide to the tune of about $40 million a year, which is not enough for policymakers to make a difference to, but at least they do. Because, there's the pharmaceutical corporations that spend 5 times as much to make sure that cannabis does not get legalized, because of the potential benefits there might be medicinally, holistically, that might help, that might get people to wean off of particular prescription drugs, right? You never know. I asked him that. And then I asked him about the celebrities that have come into space, and he basically opened the door for celebrities to come into space. And the fact was, we now have celebrities that were in the space, and of course, 2021 influencers coming from social media, taking some of the spotlight from celebrities that don't have as many obstacles. So again, where companies that want to market their products, are they going to have a celebrity endorse it or an influencer endorse it? And I asked him about that. It's a great conversation. If you get a chance to go listen to it, go look for it. Tommy Chong on Blunt Business. It was a great interview, April 2021. I love that interview. It was different. I just enjoyed the fact I got to ask him some different questions that I really wanted to care about. I wanted to know. I wasn't caught by the fact that he was like, starstruck or whatever. Look, he's very famous. I would say worldwide recognized if you see him. And there's a lot of people that worship the guy, like for what he's done and what he is, in terms of his whole lifestyle. I get it. For me, he's a smart guy. I wanted to find out some real smart stuff from him. In my way, as a podcast host, that's the kind of interviews that I wanted to see of these presidential candidates. And I think that's what, when you see both candidates and how they used it, I really feel like Trump was a little more willing to go ahead and go in different areas, because he's talkative. I mean, he can't help himself. He can go wherever he wants with a conversation. Before this, remember, he was an entertainer. He knows how to go onto a show and, be entertaining. You put him on Howard Stern, all the times he was on there, he was really, really funny. Great. And, when you look at whatever, on The Apprentice or whatever other shows, people know who it was. So, people were kind of drawn to the fact of a celebrity. And there's something different about a celebrity turning politician like this. We don't see it that whole often. With Kamala Harris, she didn't allow herself, or wasn't allowed, I don't know, to really get more out of bringing, Kamala as a person down to earth. We knew what was being allowed to say to us, almost like it was being kind of held under wraps. I don't know why that was. And I don't know if there was something where that she was only going to be allowed to be prepared for certain subjects, because if there's other places that go out of bounds, that there's something about being able to go and be extemporaneous and working off the cuff to talk might be a bit difficult, but that's also tough for politicians anyway. Politicians, you don't hear them doing much of these kind of interviews like this, but I guarantee you now, in future campaigns, this is going to be the norm. People are going to be very much into the idea that we're going to learn about presidential candidates. Oh, you know what? I'll wait till they go on Joe Rogan. I'll wait till, wait till Alex Wagner talks to her, or him, whatever it is. That's, I think, what we're going to get pretty soon. And the one thing was, I'm pretty sure that with some of these podcasts, I don't know if all of them will do it, but I know that, say like with Logan Paul or Joe Rogan or Patrick McDavid or Lex Friedman, and I think Theo as well. I think they all offered Kamala Harris an interview opportunity on those shows, and she declined. When it came to Joe Rogan, he made the point on his podcast recently that if she was going to do the interview, she was only able to commit to an hour. Meanwhile, Trump recorded 3 hours. I think J.D. Vance also did like 2 hours or something like that. And Elon Musk also went on and went 2 or 3 hours, whatever. And the thing was, is that, again, I've seen, a Joe Rogan take other, talk to everybody. I mean, Bill Maher was on, and great conversation with Bill Maher. Loved it. And John Fetterman was just on, the Democratic, I don't know if, is he senator or representative in Pennsylvania? I forget. I want to say senator, right? And he was an interesting conversation. You know who was also pretty good on Joe Rogan? Bernie Sanders. And I wanted to hear Bernie Sanders. Like, it's like, okay, go through your stuff. And it's like, I don't know if he was in campaign mode or not, but the thing was, Joe Rogan had him on. It was like an hour and a half or whatever. And Bernie was interesting. I listened to the whole thing. That was the other part. How often are you going to listen to a podcast when there are these long forms? You might actually catch the whole thing because there's a whole lot chalked into what they're saying. That was the other thing that was interesting for that in those commentaries. And I felt like I learned a lot. That's the one thing what the news is going to tell you. Listen, the news on cable and network TV, they're basically just regurgitating some of the same things we might read in a story on X, or you might see it in a YouTube video, or you might see it in an article, wherever. If you can get past the paywalls and stuff like that. But the thing is that we go through and we see, okay, what's the whole story here about what we learned about these candidates. Their policies we know about, they're going to interject what they're going to be in doing their policies going forward as the reason why they should be voted for. Got it. But then for me, more importantly, I was like, it just doesn't need to be that. Because, how many times do we talk about the political candidates in a presidential election? Let's just say that, I talk about management here, for my full time. And one of the things that's kind of an aspect we talked about for many years is that, part of the thing we used to like about presidential elections is that we would pick a candidate that we liked, that we genuinely liked because we got to know them on a personal level. We finally got a chance to go and learn more about them and who they were. And, there was always these big, large pieces on particular candidates that we learn all about them. And, there'd be a whole backstory we get about these folks, and we really get to know who they are. The legacy media doesn't do that now. They really just stick to, they might have particular pundits or people on to go and make their take about what they think about things. By the way, they're also in an echo chamber because they don't go anywhere. Like they're not really talking to people around the world. Like they're not very world renowned. They kind of just stick to their bubbles, right? Might talk to other journalist people or people that are within their Ivy League schools that they come from or whatever institutions they come from, their fraternities, whatever. They don't get out much and get to frolic with the American people. Let's just say it like that. And so what I'm looking for is I say to myself, well, I want to know more. I want to hear more about the candidates. And I don't need certain people to go and tell me what I think. Just give me the news as a consumer, as a reader, as a viewer. Just tell me what I need to know. Let me think for myself what's going to happen here. Let me talk to other people and let them talk to me about it. Actually have debate, actually have a little bit of just like, talk. But we're in an age right now, like you really can't even talk about politics. Think about it. For the most part, if you try to say that you're if you're with a particular candidate, there's always this stigma that you're given on both sides. I don't know why. But there's just so much we learned. And one of the other things I can tell you as well is that for Kamala Harris, it was really, besides the fact that she had her vice presidential candidate, right, Tim Walz, or she had Doug Emhoff that might speak. If you had people that were going to go and be speaking for her, it wasn't necessarily going to be people that are going to be part of the administration. You might hear from Barack or Michelle Obama, or Hillary Clinton, or Bill Clinton. And the thing was, you might have all these people that, former politicians that are representing the party, right? You might hear them at the DNC. But the thing was, if you're seeing at rallies, there was something that happened different this time for the Trump campaign because they had various other people that were surrogates, but were most likely going to be embedded into the cabinet or in some particular position within the Trump administration. Tulsi Gabbard, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Vivek Ramaswamy, Elon Musk. There's a lot of names right there. And you say to yourself, and Nicole Shanahan, right? And so there's all these names. And you know what you hear about them and you know who they are. And it's like, okay, they're also appearing at various appearances representing the Trump campaign. And they could also go on all these podcasts as well, which they did. They disseminated themselves. But you're not necessarily going to get the Obamas or the Clintons or others to do these podcasts in the same way to kind of continue to go ahead and make the message for the candidate they support and how close they might be towards them. None of the surrogates, right? None of that. So like, it was also who you had to bring on these podcasts to talk. And so if, you wanted Bobby Kennedy, or you wanted Tulsi Gabbard, or if you wanted Vivek, or if you wanted JD Vance, you got a plethora of people that are willing to go on all these podcasts, and he did. Now, one of the other things that's also important, and I'll take this from the Today Show, NBC News. What was very fascinating about this that they talked about was the campaign got a lot of support from young male voters. I think it was 10% more, or it was 10 points above young male voters than it was in previous years. And one of the things they mentioned of is that, Trump's son, Barron Trump, I think he's in the early 20s now. I don't think he's 19, 20, something like that, but he's in college. He's a consumer of all these podcasts. And it was Barron that advised him to appear on Joe Rogan to reach that demographic. And also, along with Barron, it was also he had other friends within the mix. I saw there was one that was on the Pierce Morgan Uncensored podcast that talked about how they did a deal to go and connect with some of these other stars. But the thing was, too, was that there was approaches that were different. I think some of these content creators, they're still, some of these podcasters are still going to be considered content creators. There was different approaches on what you were going to do. So the podcasters, okay, getting the appearance on the podcast obviously will grow some numbers or get a significant audience, a different audience maybe, to catch that podcast, that particular episode, and then catch more, whatever it is. And so that's the approach on that. On the Kamala Harris side, I kept hearing about, you'd hear people on TikTok, various content creators, being offered money to promote a particular candidate. Not appear on their stream or appear on their podcast or whatever. It was always, no, they wanted an endorsement. They thought endorsements from these people, without getting a chance to sit down and get to know the candidate, I don't think anybody wanted to do it because it's like, okay, unless their political onus is to do that, I think it would have been much more interesting to go ahead and see, well, okay, if Aiden Ross wants to go ahead and talk to Kamala and, no endorsement needed. Just have the conversation. I think it would have been much easier to go ahead and say, okay, well then maybe some of these streamers or whatever, they could have a chance to go and have them on. Like I think Kai Cenat, I believe he was offered Kamala Harris, or there was something about where I think he as well was offered money to talk about Kamala. And kind of make up of an endorsement and spread the message that she had out there. And there's some people that probably took the money. But the thing is that I think the people online, they just want to hear somebody that's genuine, that's real. And they don't want to have people that are just, messengers for a candidate. Like I wouldn't want to do that either. You want to go and have an ad played on your stream, whatever. Okay, that might be one thing, but try to get somebody to go ahead and talk about whatever it is because they feel like they need to do that. I don't know if it was something I want to do or that the other podcasters want to do either. So they probably didn't. They probably chose not to. It's an approach. It's the thing is make access for the candidate. And if there's a reason why you don't, then what is it? And then who is it? Why isn't there somebody else there that could do it? That was the other part. And the other thing was that there was a thought that the media establishment that's out there, you want to go and put Kamala Harris in front of other media. I mean, when it comes to Trump, he didn't necessarily do a lot of those interviews, right? Like the legacy interviews. He'd go on to some of the ones he was familiar with, obviously, some of his friends. Maria Bartiromo, Sean Hannity. For Kamala, okay, she went to Data Bash. She went on a town hall with Anderson Cooper. She did Brett Baird's special report on Fox News, right? And she did a lot of interviews, right? Went on The View, went on Stephen Colbert, right? It's all these national big money programs, the traditional route of a campaign. Okay, so some of these people are going to go on other shows, which is the normal route. But, what happened was that it's still these big flashy shows. I mean, there's a difference in what you're getting from the grassroots of podcasting. And even though you might have a flashy podcast, it still comes down to the fact that it was somebody that was doing it. Like, I mean, even if Trump did it, he'd do Piers Morgan. He did Megyn Kelly, and he did some others. But the thing is that there's other shows, and there was other people that would take some of these other interviews, like J.D. Vance. He took a lot of these different shows that might be, when he gets into them, they're going to ask some pretty aggressive questions on him. They're going to try to press him on things, which they did. Well, there was Lowell Navarro at New York Times. That was a great interview. Watching J.D. Vance on, say, any of the Sunday shows. The thing is that it was just a particular, Trump didn't need to do those. He'd already done those a couple of cycles around. So he put J.D. Vance to it. And Trump was more on these podcasts to bring himself out to a newer audience, to these younger voters, potentially, and it worked. It was a good strategy. For Kamala Harris, for whatever reason, the campaign, obviously they got a lot of money in their war chest. They can go ahead and spend whatever money they can on their campaign. That's fine. But they just decided to go a different route. I don't know if I necessarily would have appreciated that route, but I wanted to hear more from her. And I wanted people to go ahead and find out more of what she would do. Because if she had a particular question, whether it was a town hall or whether it was something that was being asked by an interviewer on a podcast, we didn't get a whole lot more. It's unfortunate because I wanted to hear more. I think for the good of the audience, as a media expert, I want to make sure there's enough information out there for everybody. And I don't want to go ahead and control and contrive what's being said. I like the idea of letting the information out into the ether. Now, of course, everybody can go and have this thing about misinformation, disinformation, controlling things, what's allowed on social media that shouldn't be out there. I'm not here to suppress any speech, okay? I'm anti-censorship. Very obvious on that. So, I mean, yes, there's going to be some shit that's going to be out there that should not be. That it feels very ignorant and also just feels very salacious. But there's a lot of that stuff going on. And nobody's really stopping. It's like we're kind of used to being able to go and see raw, uncut, uncensored, explicit footage or commentary or whatever it is. And it might trigger some people. It's nothing new. What you need to do is that if there's anything that goes against any particular grain, so the YouTube, they want to go ahead and censor any content because of any adult content or any explicit language or anything else that might come across that would, be offensive to viewers or listeners. Okay, fine. But there's also you got a set list of rules. Like FCC, you got a set list of boundaries. The one thing was that there wasn't a set list, and there's still not a set list yet for online. We know there's some particular terms and conditions. We know there's some terms of service, but there's not a clear-cut list. Sometimes there's going to be things that will be taken down, and we might not have an explanation as to why. And that was a big thing going on in 2016, 2020, where particular content might be on YouTube that might get censored, but we're like, why? But then people realize, well, if YouTube's going to do this to us, we're going to go other places. So after 2016, 2020, when everybody was in lockdown, people had a chance to go and open up other avenues. So other YouTube alternatives, right? Or other social media alternatives. And they all opened up. So competition came into play. That's fine with me. But that's what happened. There's a couple of stories where the media definitely did talk about this week. Vulture, New York, talk about how podcast being the new battleground state. I'll take from here real quick. And they say that this case for this being the first true podcast election cycle continues to hold. Podcast election cycle. After all, you can't be a presidential candidate in 2024 without trying to reach more voters where they actually are. This doesn't mean abandoning traditional media spaces like broadcast networks and newspapers. What does it mean? What it does mean is that there's growing value in spending time with newer age media platforms. Exactly right. So that's what you do. So they talked about what Trump's approach to podcasting was, and when they focus on Harris's approach, it was similarly targeted, appealing to women on Call Her Daddy and unlocking us with Brene Brown, and then black men through, most recently, Club Shay Shay, and they didn't say anybody else, but they mentioned Club Shay Shay. So they talk about when it comes to podcasting, big podcasting is a messy business, a culture of supercharged by micro celebrity and the internet. Messiness is a kind of a proxy for authenticity. I agree with that. I'm trying to cut out some of the stuff that's kind of very much narrative, so I don't want to deal with that part. And then we had studies that were talking about who watched or listened to the podcasts. Democrats, there was a USA Today poll that stated that 72% of respondents had not seen Kamala Harris on a podcast, and 77.5% had not seen a Trump podcast appearance. But these are people reading newspapers. I don't know where the poll was actually placed, but if it's USA Today, it's a newspaper. So implying that a quarter of respondents, give or take, had actually listened. This might seem like a small proportion of Americans were reached by these presidential podcast spots, but in an electoral contest where victory lies in winning the margins, it's not insignificant. It's only set to grow. So there's some points made right there. I'll take that. Among other stories we had, there was stuff that was done from Forbes talking about the podcast tour, the bro podcast tour that Trump was on, basically, for young male voters. Elon Musk recently talked about how that the podcast appearances for Trump made a big difference in the election. Musk would say that, quote, to a reasonable-minded, smart person who's not hardcore one way or the other, they just listen to someone talk for a few hours, and that's how they decide whether you're a good person or whether they like you. And that was the idea that they decided to go with. I'm going to also take from Pointer. A couple of weeks ago, they also brought up the story about this. And they said that what sets podcasts apart from other mediums is they're often geared to a specific audience. They talked to Natalie J. Stroud, a professor of communications at the University of Texas at Austin. And she said, quote, the presidential candidates are responding to a media environment where they cannot reach as much of the electorate as they once could via ad buys during national and local news programs. By doing niche media appearances, the candidates are hoping to reach distinct audiences to not only shorten their base, but potentially convert voters or sway undecideds. And these appearances get a lot. When you think about the fact that Trump appearing on Theo Vaughn's podcast, I got 14 million views. Joe Rogan's podcast, on the Joe Rogan Experience, he got, I think, 37 million views last I checked, and I know it's like the second most listened to or third most listened to podcast ever on that program. Now, when Trump decided to go and do one of the first podcasts, he went to Logan Paul's podcast, and it was said that Barron Trump, oh, he's 18 years old. Okay. He influenced his dad to do the Logan Paul show because it was one of Barron's favorites, and Logan Paul has quite a big following. We know that. Many podcast listeners don't watch the evening news or debates or TV interviews with the candidates. For them, podcasts are the only times they do hear from Harris or Trump. Well, that and social media. And so that's the thing that we got out of this whole thing, is that it was obvious that podcasting and social media was the driving force for this election. We now know that doing an interview on 60 Minutes or being on The View or going on the Sunday shows is not as relevant as it once was. Maybe not for the candidates themselves. Maybe for the surrogates or their other minions that are part of the campaign. Maybe that's it. But other than that, no. And I can tell you, I think that's going to be much more constant in the future. That's only better for podcasts. They get the idea, well, for podcasting, okay, this is good for the election cycle every 4 years. Now, what do you do to go and build up on that? Do you just go and come to it when it happens? There's obviously some political commentary that they live off the year-round cycle of this, which is fine too. But I think you got to ask yourself, well, podcasting really got its run, and people are now going to be paying attention to it. And I think that for 2025, based on what happened in this election cycle, that podcasting needs to really go and take advantage and leverage the fact that they are an arbiter for information. We get long-form information. We learn a lot from it. And if you can do the podcasts, don't do it like everybody else. Anyway, come back next week for another podcast, Broadcasters Podcast. Remember, the content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.